Okay, everybody, we're going to get started. Welcome to the fourth, I believe, webinar that we're doing, our educational webinar series. My name is Roger Lane. I'm a marketing manager at Sensient. I've been with the company about 5 years.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Keera Perumbala. I am the marketing manager for Sensient Flavors as well, working in a wonderful team of 8. Welcome to our webinar series 4. So type any questions you may have in the text box, and we will try our best to answer as many as possible. And if you find this topic interesting and you would like further engagement from us, please reach out to your Sensient account manager, and we'll be happy to do a detailed version of this with actual flavor tastings. We're hoping that things will get back to normal sooner than everybody's anticipating. So here's, we'll wait for your request then. And lastly, we have another webinar this Thursday on the topic of responding to the rise in home cooking, co-hosted by one of our AI vendor partners called Tastewise. We hope to see you there as well. All right, let's jump into today's session of Trends to Taste. Trends to Taste, to give you an introduction, is our annual publication that aims to offer understanding of the emerging consumer and consumer trends while translating them into actionable insights that not only narrow a gap between a brand and its consumer, but also help inspire innovation for other product makers. So why is it important to keep an eye at the future trends? Consumer tastes, as we know, are constantly changing, and the influence you cannot find influence of this in just the food and beverage world. The modern day consumer is inspired by headline making art, fashion, music, cinema, everything from the political situation to the economic influences all play a role. So understanding who this consumer is, how they're leading their lives, kind of helps give you a more complete picture. And year over year, we track down these trends to see how are they moving, what pattern are they changing into, and how do we identify and track these patterns. A little view into our methodology. Take a combination approach of art and science. We hold many market excursions. As you all know, we're a global company. So we have a wonderful global team that embarks on this Trends to Taste journey with us. We hold market excursions. We hold deep discussions with industry experts, food and beverage industry experts like mixologists, restaurateurs, chefs, etc. Take all this information, use syndicated research. We work with a number of research partners that are experts in their own field. We kind of take all this information, synthesize it, and conduct our own primary research and reach out to internal experts as well. We obviously have at our disposal a broad team of innovation experts, R&D experts, and our entire marketing team gets together, and we put this against the backdrop of broader industry trends to get a deeper understanding of how this landscape is evolving. And the approach that we're taking today for this presentation is the idea of interpreting time. So we're exploring different elements of time, like past, present, and future, and trying to fit in where the story of a particular product belongs. Where does it fit? In each of these eras, like past, present, and future, we're exploring the trends that are almost a dichotomy of each other. Like we find, take past for example, we find that there are consumers kind of leaning towards two extremes of an opinion, and how all of that is being manifested in the market. So we capture this zeitgeist and symbolize them through a flavor that our flavorists have expertly created. So all of this, we hope, provides you inspiration for your own innovators and for your own product creators. The first trend, the first era that we're going to explore is engaging the past. How are consumers reacting to the idea of past? When we're in a state of constant transition, we tend to romanticize the idea of past. We tend to lean towards a time that brings us comfort. So we find that there are consumers on one side of the spectrum that are doing this, that are leaning towards this idea of nostalgia, that choose to reflect on the past. And on the other side, we have consumers who are actively refusing the past and kind of trying to adapt to a more modern future. Examples, how are things materializing in the market that talks to these 2 points? Let's take a look at it. So the first one we're going to talk about is, under engaging the past, is the idea of reflection. We find that consumers find cultural comfort through everything around them, right? Think about all the Disney classics that have been remade in the past year, everything from Beauty and the Beast to Aladdin to Lion King to Little Mermaid, and they continue to do that. We find that consumers are engaging with this their own past, so much so that social media will find you hashtagging Throwback Thursdays and Flashback Fridays, etc., because everybody wants to go back to that comforting time. Retrophilia is another trend that we keep is another term that we keep hearing, with the extent of and a great example is Titanic 2022. There is a replica of the maiden voyage of Titanic being built somewhere, minus the tragedy and minus the sinking. Everything about it has been or is being recreated just as it were in 1914. Fun fact, today is actually, in 1912, today was the day that Titanic set out on its maiden voyage, and its last voyage apparently, but we're seeing that this trip is already sold out. We're finding a lot of consumers engaging with the idea of a simpler time. Another fun fact, the difference between nostalgia and retrophilia is nostalgia talks about sentiment towards something that you have experienced personally, while retrophilia talks to interest in something from the past that you have not personally engaged in, that you've not personally experienced, but you want to engage in for the curiosity of it. And all of this is definitely translating to the food side of the world as well, as we see more modern restaurants. Like Next is an example from our own Chicago land here, who is known for their cutting edge menus. But last year in 2019, they took a kind of like a nod to the past with an exploration menu called Silk and Spice Route, talking to the past influences from Asia. And we see a lot of speakeasy resurgence as well. If you go to urban cities all over the world, you find a lot of speakeasies, just as it were in the past, kind of making a lot of conversation. And this idea of reflection, we are symbolizing through a flavor called poudre douce. Poudre douce is a medieval spice blend that was used in literally everything from roasting meats to bakery items, and we now find people using it in alcohols, etc. And the first time it was mentioned was in a book, in a Parisian household manuscript called Le Ménagier de Paris. It was kind of like a guidebook for housewives back in the day. This is a wonderful flavor. It's the flavor notes on this are like warm spices. It's got a peppery bite. To a lot of people that have tasted this, to them it tastes like Christmas. It tastes like the holidays. Let's go on to the other side of engaging the past, is the idea of refusal. A lot of consumers we find, and this is true definitely in the younger generation, millennials and Gen Zers and so on, this idea of past is fine, but how are we actively changing that idea of past and moving on to a more acceptable future? So we find them actively being proponents of kind of changing that conversation. Take fashion, for example. Billy Porter has been in the forefront of making a lot of, creating a lot of discussion, a dialogue around the tuxedo gown that he wore in Oscars, last year. You find a lot of examples in the fashion world where they're saying past is fine, but the future is where everything is acceptable and everybody is acceptable. A great example of something that has been done a certain way in the past how many ever decades, but suddenly took a change. introducing male cheerleaders in the Super Bowl. It was the first time ever last year when LA Rams featured a couple of male cheerleaders in their big Super Bowl presence. And lastly, disruption is no longer seen as a bad thing, right? Now, if you're a disruptor, you're looked at as a leader of sorts. Take Silicon Valley, for example. They've always been in the forefront of the idea of disruption. And it was kind of similar last year, where everything was, in the past few years rather, where they're taking on the big Hollywood studios now, with Silicon Valley leaders backing up the hit movies and hit shows, telling different stories and kind of changing that narrative from there. And this idea of refusal, we are portraying through a flavor called Romeo Julieta. It's a traditional Brazilian flavor that is a combination of guava paste and cheese. And true to its name, it's this idea of two flavors that you don't see come together, actually do come together and then make this really impactful combination. The flavor notes on these are very jammy, tropical fruit notes combined with the subtle freshness of cheese. Don't imagine like a cheddar cheese, but this is like the fresh, white, whipped cheese. For the next era of controlling the present, we're going to have Roger Lane walk us through this.
Hi, everybody. Before we get started, actually, I want to ask a poll question about your experiences, if we could do that. Go ahead and answer that question, and then we'll go ahead and get started in a minute or two. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to move into the present, as Keera mentioned. So this is really about how consumers are engaging with their environment today. The phrase we like to use here is "go big or go home." Both of those ways are fine. You can interact with the world around you in any way you'd like. You can take the tack of going out and gently wading into the waters of an experience. You can do that. You can slowly do it, or you can kind of take yourself back and kind of be on your own environment without being in the world around you. Consumers are now binge watching entire seasons of a show in one sitting. They're immersing themselves. We're all doing that right now, unfortunately. And we're immersing ourselves in fantasy experiences in the real world. But on the opposite side of that, there are consumers who are completely overwhelmed by the world around them, and they choose to escape from reality, even if just for a couple of minutes. So if we look at the first side of this, and we look at immersion, the first little section we want to talk about here is curated experience. This idea of retail theater. So it's not, it's no longer the norm to kind of just go in a store and pick something up and walk out. The experience needs to be bigger. It needs to be more immersive. It needs to be more interesting to the consumer. So you're seeing things like this Canada Goose cold room. That's what the photo is there. This is basically a room within the Canada Goose store. It's surrounded by ice blocks. There's a door on the front. And the temperature has been set to about negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Consumers can go in, try the coats on, and see just how warm they are versus just having a salesperson tell them how warm the coats are. There's also a park in Utah called Evermore Park. This is basically like Middle Earth, or sort of a fantasy environment with elves and dwarves and all these things. Fully immersive fantasy village, right? So you walk in as a consumer of this, and you're immediately immersed in an environment that's fully fantasy. Everyone's dressed up, everyone's speaking with an accent. It's a very unique, kind of interesting experience. The second one we'll talk about here is food obsession. So the photo here is, this is the Reese's Halloween candy converter. I don't know if anyone's heard of this before. Number one candy at Halloween time every single year is Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. It's the number one candy. It's been that way for many, many years. But a lot of times when people are trick-or-treating, they may get candy they don't want. So Reese's came up with this great machine where people put in unwanted candy. So for me, that'd be black jelly beans or black licorice or things like that. You put that in the top, and out the bottom comes Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. The second bullet there is this little Jean. So he's a rap star, fairly new rap star in the world. But last year, he actually had a Flaming Hot Cheetos overdose. I know it sounds kind of like a crazy idea, but he's so addicted to Flaming Hot Cheetos that he eat entire bags at once, and it burned a hole in his stomach. So he had to go to the emergency room and be treated for an ulcer, basically. And he said since then, he's still going to keep eating them. That's how addicted he is to these things. And the last one on this slide is technology explosion. So we've seen this idea of technology being more fully immersed into society and kind of what's happening with consumers and technology interaction. So again, we're talking about retail here. There's this augmented reality Gucci experience. So there was a new digital campaign that Gucci did in spring of 2018. It had scannable ads, it had augmented and virtual reality experiences in the store itself that matched the print campaign. So you could go into the store and almost walk into the environment of the campaign. And the photo here on the slide is actually a sculpture from Trafalgar Square in London. This is called Please Feed the Lions. It was an interactive installation with a bright red line. If you've ever been to Trafalgar, there are lions surrounding this fountain. This sculpture was added specifically for this installation. And it had a deep learning algorithm to create poetry out of the words that were spoken to it by its viewers. So it's a little hard to see on the screen here, but the mouth of the lion is open and there's a video screen on the inside of it where it would continually create poetry throughout the day using the deep learning algorithm that was within it and create interesting poetry out of whatever was said. It was also projected on the side of the museum on a giant wall so everybody could see what was happening there. So the poll sharing here. So what type of taste explorer are you? 81% of you said, I love experimenting and trying new things. That's a huge group, and I'm glad to see that because that's something that we really love here at Sensient is getting out there, and that's what this whole program is about, getting out there and exploring what's happening in the marketplace today and moving forward and seeing what we can do next. So the flavors that we've chosen to represent Immersion is a plant called the peppercorn. It's a plant native to the Himalayas, and the reason we chose it is because this plant and this ingredient is an integral part of the lives of the people who live there. It's prized for its medicinal properties. For pain and inflammation, they use it like aspirin. And the warming flavor of the actual product itself is used in stews and soups and things like that to keep them warm. It's also a little similar to a Szechuan peppercorn if you think about that flavor and kind of that numbing sensation it has in your mouth. And even the twigs of the plant. So not even just using the actual peppercorns themselves, but the twigs are used as toothbrushes. So this is used throughout every part of the plant and within the Himalayan culture. The flavor itself is sort of peppery. Obviously, it's a peppercorn, but it has aromas of grapefruit and passion fruit. It's a lot fruitier, a lot fresher than a standard black peppercorn. So if we think about the next side of this is diversion. The opposite, as Keera mentioned, we're kind of talking about a dichotomy here between the two sides. So the first one we're going to talk about here is social isolation, which is very present for what's happening right now. What's interesting here is that there have been enough AI advances in the world today that you can basically remove interaction with people completely. That's obviously something that we're experiencing today, and we've had to find new ways to interact with each other. But it's possible for you to do basically everything without interacting with another human being at all. And kind of on the same vein here, there's something called digital detox. This idea of getting away from it all. We've done that for decades, but now it even includes digital. So there's a silent retreat. It's called the Den Meditation Silent Retreat. It's a 5-day experience that's totally silent. You're not just unplugged from conversation, you don't say a word, but you're also unplugged from technology. So you don't have your cell phones, you don't have your tablets, you don't have anything. So basically what you're doing is you're spending your days meditating, doing yoga, doing nature hikes, things like that, all without saying a word for 5 days. The next one we're going to talk about here is conscious connection. So this is the idea of public spaces and kind of finding new ways to connect with people, right? How do we divert ourselves from what's happening today? So maybe we're gonna, try to find a way to interact with society in that way. So there's a place called Heal House in Brooklyn. They've combined all sorts of different diverse healing modalities, different types of practitioners, and they're all under one roof to help people find an inclusive space that's focused on holistic healing, it's focused on wellness. There's different, like I said, different types of yoga, there's chakra alignment, chi cleansing, all sorts of different interesting kind of and very disparate ideas all under one roof. And then airlines and hotels are offering a spiritual escape option for travelers using science, right? So using sleep suits, circadian lights, different types of menus to make the experience of flying and traveling much more holistic and kind of calming. And then there's something called cord cutting. This is something that you guys may have heard of before. People are getting burned out on social media. People are starting to distrust what's happening with companies like Facebook and Instagram. Gen Z especially is a very big part of this. 34% of them, in one of the surveys we looked at, they've reported that they're leaving social media completely. And then you're also seeing these tech companies come out with tools to help you manage your own time. So Google has a digital platform, the well-being platform, and Apple has a screen time app. It shows you where you're spending your time online and how much time you're spending. So you can make those decisions yourself and say, hey, you know, maybe I'm spending too much time on Twitter this week. Maybe I need to stop and turn it off. So you're kind of finding your own ways of getting through the day. And the flavor we've chosen here is it's a very interesting flavor. We try to do a fusion flavor every year. And we specifically chose this chocolate toadstool flavor as a mushroom flavor. And the reason we chose it is because it kind of represented this idea of falling down a rabbit hole like Alice in Wonderland. You know, after she falls down the rabbit hole, the first thing she sees is the caterpillar on top of the mushroom. So that was sort of the idea there. We're also seeing a lot of rise in mushroom usage, both magical and otherwise. So you're seeing medicinal mushrooms actually being decriminalized and legalized in certain areas now. They're using it for PTSD, they're using it for schizophrenia, things like that. This is not a magical mushroom flavor, but it is a mushroom flavor that's added to chocolate. So what you're going to get here with this flavor is some deep, earthy umami notes, and it's paired very subtly with chocolate. So the thing that's interesting about this when we're tasting these flavors, well, I'll tell you a little bit about the tasting that we do. As we're developing, we look at them in both salt water and in sugar water as a very simple way to taste them, because we do have savory and sweet sort of applications that we use. So if you put this flavor in a salt water application, that really earthy umami mushroom note is what you taste first. And if you put it into a sugar water solution, the chocolate is the first thing. It's much more pronounced in the sweet water. So it's a very interesting sort of fusion of flavor. So we're going to move into the future. So how are consumers going to live in the world around them, right? What kind of future are we going to have? Nobody really knows what the future is going to hold, of course, but that hasn't stopped people from thinking about it, right? Literature, popular culture, television, all of these things are talking about, are kind of showing us visions of what's going to happen in the world in the future. So it's a very interesting sort of time in our world, and you're seeing more and more of this every single day. But how is the world going to advance? Is it going to be something where we have a near perfect kind of utopian society, or, you know, there are others who think maybe this is going to all lead to trouble? We just don't know, obviously, what's going to happen from day to day. So the questions we're asking here: will humanity create a future of struggle or one of harmony? So what would you choose, dystopia or utopia? So the first side of it, we'll start with dystopia, kind of a strange subject to be talking about with the world that we're living in today. But the first one that we're looking at here is tech gone wild. So we've talked about technology a little bit already, but it's really kind of ramping up and really kind of just exploded over the past couple of years. There are companies now that are microchipping their employees. I know it sounds really, really crazy, but there's a company in Wisconsin, just north of where we live. It's called 3 Square Market. They have about 80 employees, and 50 of those employees got RFID chips implanted in their hands. They give them access to the building. They can buy out of the vending machine with it, do their time card. They don't have to, clock in every single day. And it sounds crazy, but actually it's been so popular, even more of their employees have gotten microchipped. You're also seeing it in countries like Sweden. About 3,000 Swedes have had the microchip inserted into their hand to hold entry codes, to buy train tickets, vending machines, as I mentioned, things like that, without having to use a card. Then you're also seeing this idea of technology moving into other areas like fashion. So I talked a little bit about Gucci and their sort of augmented reality experience. This is actually an Instagram influencer, the photo on the slide here. Her name is Shudu Graham. She is not a real person. Shudu Graham is a digitally created person from a photographer, a fashion photographer, and he's used her, and she's been used in actual fashion campaigns with real models at the same time, and you really cannot tell the difference. It's a really crazy experience. You're also seeing apocalyptic things, as I mentioned on the last slide. You're seeing more and more of that happen in popular culture and in entertainment. In 2018, the word of the year was toxic from Oxford Dictionary, and then the other word of the year from dictionary.com was misinformation. Really kind of not good words that are out there. Words that accompanied the word toxic at that time, kind of what's closest to it in how they're kind of experiencing this is toxic masculinity, toxic culture, and toxic air. And it's interesting if you look year over year, kind of what's happened with these words of the year, because they've been doing this for many years. The words have steadily gotten worse over the last several years. Previous words included things like change, identity, and it's the sort of the kind of culture that we're living in today. You're also seeing, as I mentioned, a surge in dystopian entertainment. So you're seeing things, this happens to be Bird Box on the slide here, things like A Quiet Place, Handmaid's Tale, Black Mirror. All these shows are kind of showing you what can happen if things go the wrong way. And it's not something that's unique. It's actually something that's happened in our culture for centuries. Every time there's a kind of a change or a sort of an upheaval, entertainment and culture kind of responds with showing you what could happen and how it could be better. So it's a really interesting sort of idea that's not new. It's something that's been around for a very long time. And then the next one here is shape-shifting. So this is the idea of this a really sort of great graphic slide. This photo. I love this photo. That is a non-melting popsicle. You can see there, I don't think it's actually happening. She's not having a blowtorch at her face, but it's a very interesting idea. It was inspired by a project to the U.S. military called Project Habakkuk. They built a mile-long aircraft carrier out of ice. So it was a really, if you have time, look it up. It's a very, very interesting idea. But they created a material using wood pulp and ice mixed together. It's called pykrete. And it actually sat on a lake for about a year before it finally melted and sank. But that's the same idea that they're using here at this popsicle. And then the other one here is the alternative limb project. So people like to be very sort of unique and sort of interesting, and they like to kind of express themselves in unique ways. And this is for people that have lost a limb. So if they're missing an arm or a hand, there's a collective out there called the Alternative Limb Project who actually creates unique prosthetics for each individual client. So one of them might be a tentacle covered in leaves. One of them might be a robotic arm. One of them might be a clockwork arm. They're all individually made. They're all worked on by sculptors. So they're very, very unique and very, very interesting. So the flavor we've chosen for Dystopia is a flavor called fermented yaopan. I don't know if people out there know what yaopan is, but it is the only North American plant that contains caffeine. It's related to the holly family. It's been used for centuries by Native Americans, and it thrives in harsh conditions. It's part of the desert Southwest environment. That's really where it comes from. It thrives so well that it's said to enjoy suffering. And then fermentation obviously has been used for centuries to preserve food and beverages when refrigeration didn't exist or we didn't have the ability to preserve food in other ways. So we decided to combine those two together to create something that would represent what you might do in the future if you couldn't get your caffeine. If something happened where the supply chain completely broke down or you know, Coca-Cola went under, where would you get your caffeine? You might get it from the Alpine plant. And then we thought, well, if you're going to take it on the go, how are you going to keep it good? You're going to ferment it. So the flavor itself is reminiscent of roasted black and green tea, but it has some floral notes and a slightly sour finish from that fermentation note that we added. It's a really unique, interesting flavor. Again, a little bit of a fusion flavor that we've created there. And then we'll end on a positive note. This is Utopia. So if we think about the positive side of the future, what could happen in the future? Where are we today that's showing us where we might be moving toward a positive environment? So the first one here is high in the pyramid. This is the idea that there's so much diversity that happened in the 2018 elections. There were more women that were elected, more LGBTQ people were elected, people of color. This is a picture from Rolling Stone here. You can see a few of the people that were elected in 2018. And then there's something called the Wilson Pipe Ocean Cleanup Project. I don't know who is aware of this, but it's a really interesting project. It's a 2,000-foot long floating pipe that floats in the ocean with a 9-foot net below it. And it was named after Wilson from the movie with Tom Hanks. But basically what it's meant for is to sweep the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. If you don't know what that is, it's a patch of floating garbage twice the size of Texas that literally floats off the coast of California between California and Hawaii. So it's created to kind of police that and kind of sweep up all that garbage and get it out of the ocean. And they finally found some success in 2019. They've redeveloped it a couple times, and they're finally seeing success in pulling plastic out of the ocean. So it's really exciting. Technology, again, we're talking about intuitive technology. So the picture on the slide here, these are Anybotics animal robot dogs. So you think about driverless delivery, right? So if Tesla comes out with a delivery truck that brings you your packages, how does it get off the truck? If I'm not going to go out and pick it up, if I'm not home, what happens? Well, this company, Anybotics, came up with the idea of these robot dogs. The boxes sit on the back of the animal, using air quotes there, the animal's back. They hop off the truck, walk up to your house, tip over, drop the package off, and crawl back into the truck. It's a really interesting kind of solution to what's going on today. And there's also something called the Zozo suit. So this is a customized clothing company out of Asia that creates customized clothing for you. So it actually the company sends you a black bodysuit with a bunch of white dots on it. It's kind of like a motion capture suit that you might see from the movies. And you scan yourself using their app, and it sends you clothes with your specific measurements for your for your entire body. So it's this idea, again, of creating something specifically for you. And there's another thing that you're seeing a little bit more of today is responsible retail. So this is the idea. Food and beverage brands are doing things like removing plastic straws, like Amazon here in the US. In the UK, McDonald's has done something similar. They're thinking more about how to reduce waste and put things out of take things out of the environment. And then you have companies like Amazon. This is the Amazon Sphere project. This is 3 glass domes. It's a little hard to see on the slide there, but there are 3 glass domes that sit outside Amazon's headquarters in Seattle. There are 40,000 plants within there. It's a tropical rainforest basically inside. 400 different species of plants. Amazon is a very stressful environment to work in. They're very demanding of the people that work for them. But this gives the employees of Amazon a chance to take themselves out of the environment of their office and actually go outside. I'm using air quotes again. Within this dome, there are paths in there. There are different tables and chairs kind of set up. You can have meetings out there. It's just a way for the employees there to de-stress a little bit in the environments they're currently working in. So if we look at the flavor that we would have chosen here for Utopia, we chose a flavor called Salon. This is actually a product that exists today in the world. So there are times when we're creating these flavors that we choose something that exists. It may just be a unique ingredient or from a region that people aren't familiar with. So this happens to be from the Middle East. So when you think about Utopia, in the ancient world, Utopia was a land of milk and honey. It was this idea of perfection, right? But honey referred to in that phrase doesn't actually come from bees. It actually translates as date palm syrup, and that's what Salon actually is. And the flavor here that's sort of interesting, sweet brown notes, slightly bitter edge, tempered with some creaminess. And if you had a chance to taste this, you'd see this, but it's similar to molasses. So this is something you could easily sub in for a molasses flavor or a maple flavor. But it has a bit more bitterness, a bit more floral to it. Just something a little bit more unique than something like a molasses. So we've looked at 2019's big picture drivers, and I do want to say, we're showing you 2019 flavors, but the thing that's interesting about this program is that it's really forward thinking. So these are the next 3 to 5 year type trends. We're not talking about 2019, now it's over. It's really that these trends will continue to influence consumers for the next couple of years. But I do want to give you a sneak peek at what we've done for 2020. But before we do that, I want to ask the other poll question that we have and see what you guys think there. So number one is at a restaurant. So not surprising there. A lot of times restaurants are doing really unique things. They're using unique ingredients that you may not have access to at your own grocery store. A lot of times they're more experimental. They're able to kind of do new things and try new things very quickly. So yeah, that's great. All right, so let's give you a little preview of what's happening for 2020. So our Trends to Taste 2020 program is all about influence and impact. So a consumer's viewpoint is very complex, as we mentioned before, and it's shaped by the world around them. But what's sort of interesting about this is when we start thinking about where your products fit into this ecosystem. Is your product an influence on a consumer and their behavior, or is it impacted by that behavior? If you're able to understand that nuance, you're able to help position your product a little bit better, and you can position it for maximum effect, basically. So for each of our trends, we have identified how consumers are influenced by the broader global macro trends that are out there and the impact that influence has on their decision making. Again, we've created really unique, inventive flavors here to kind of symbolize and represent what we're seeing in the marketplace. And I'm going to show you just a little bit about what that first kind of mega trend that we're going to look at here. So the first one we're going to talk about here is seismic shift. That's the first trend that we're going to look at. And the big question we're asking here is, how will consumers react to the massive changes taking place around them? We've talked about change already within the 2019 framework, but there's a broader shift in society that's happening in the world right now. The old guard is being taken down. New influences and influencers are taking hold. Obviously, change is not something new. It's something that people have experienced before. But now we're seeing changes happening everywhere, all at the same time. Every single sector is seeing change, from food and beverage to fashion. It's really pretty much everywhere. And it's also moving much quicker. You know, you think about change in the past, right? Of course, the 60s were very turbulent. The 70s, the 80s, things changed then, but it was much slower because we didn't have connection and access the way we do today. So basically, you know, you need to be ready for this change or you might be left behind. We're not acceptable or comfortable accepting things as they are. We want to push forward toward a better future. So the phrase we're looking at here is, be the change in the world you want to, or be the change you want to see in the world. It's a way of taking that change or that sort of seismic shift and what's happening and turning that on its head and using it to your advantage. So that is a sneak preview. I'm not even going to show you the flavors here. So what we would like to do, you know, is get some of your feedback here and experience that program firsthand. Taste what Sensient has created for 2020. This is a program that is essentially a program that's best when you can have a tasting. We would love to come out and show this program to our customers. So please reach out to your account manager to set up a meeting. And that's it. So thank you very much.